On my long-awaited vacation to Oregon, I knew I had to experience the thrill of camping in the vast, eerie forest. Little did I know that this adventure would turn into a terrifying nightmare that I would never forget. As the sun began to set, I hiked deep into the forest and found a secluded spot to set up my tent. The sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I started a small campfire, which cast dancing shadows on the trees around me. I set up my tent in a clearing and started a campfire, but my peace was shattered when a figure emerged from the shadows and silently sat at the other end of my campfire. I tried to break the tension by asking if they were camping nearby, but they remained silent, their eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. The stranger's presence made me uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After what felt like an eternity, the figure suddenly stood up and vanished into the darkness, leaving me shaken and alone. Later that night, as I lay in my tent, I hear faint whispers echoing through the woods. Fear gripped me and I struggled to keep my composure. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside my tent sent chills down my spine. I dared not move, hoping it was just an animal passing by. But when the whispers grew louder, I knew I was not alone. My heart pounded in my chest as the tent's zipper slowly began to open. The figure from earlier emerged, accompanied by 3 others, their faces obscured by darkness. Panic consumed me as they surrounded my tent, their malevolent eyes peering through the fabric. Without warning, they tore open the tent and dragged me out into the night. I screamed for help, but the eerie sounds of the forest swallowed my cries. They held me captive, searching for any valuables. My mind raced, trying to devise a plan of escape, but their grip was too strong. One of them brandished a rusty knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices carrying an air of sinister intent. The cold metal of the knife pressed against my skin, and I knew I was at their mercy. With a sudden urge of adrenaline, I fought back with all my strength. I managed to break free and sprinted into the darkness, not looking back. Their menacing laughter echoed behind me as I ran. In the distance, a faint light flickered like a beacon of hope. I ran toward it, my heart pounding in my ears. As I drew closer, I realized it was a small cabin nestled deep in the woods. Relief washed over me, and I pounded on the door, desperate for sanctuary. An elderly man opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of me, disheveled and terrified. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in frantic sobs. He led me inside, offering me a hot cup of tea to calm my nerves. The old man called the police, and they arrived shortly after. I recounted the horrifying events to them, but when they went to investigate, the cabin where I'd been held captive had vanished without a trace. To this day, I still can't explain what happened in those dark and foreboding woods. The memory of that night haunts me, a constant reminder of the evil that lurks in the shadows. As I drove back from a job interview, I turned it into a mini vacation, taking the scenic route through dense forest and one-lane roads. The rain poured down, creating a mysterious and adventurous atmosphere. At 1 a.m., I checked my phone and saw I was still 62 miles from the next turn, with no signs of civilization. I continued driving, hoping that the GPS issue was just a temporary glitch. However, after an hour of driving through the dark forest, I realized that something was terribly wrong. My phone was still frozen on the same screen, showing me the same confusing directions. Frustration and exhaustion started to set in as the rain showed no signs of letting up. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lost in a never-ending maze. Suddenly, an intersection appeared ahead. A truck was parked on the side, and I thought the driver might be experiencing the same GPS problem. I slowed down, hoping to get some help or directions. As I pull up to the intersection, I glanced at the street sign and thought I recognized it from my previous trip. With a sense of relief, I made a turn, believing that I had finally found the right path. However, after another hour of driving, I found myself still deep in the heart of the forest. Panic started to creep in, and I realized I had made a wrong turn. I had no idea where I was, and the rain made it even harder to see the road ahead. Just when I started to lose hope, I saw a faint glow in the distance. A billboard sign emerged through the rain, revealing a motel in the middle of an isolated forest. I pulled into the empty parking lot, hoping to find some help or guidance. As I entered the motel, the front room was dark and deserted. There was no one at the front desk, and a feeling of unease washed over me. Despite the eerie silence, I decided to stay and figure out my situation. Just as I was about to explore further, a knock on the window startled me. I turned to see the man from the truck standing outside, soaked from head to toe. His long hair and beard were dripping with rain, and his eyes bore a cold and sinister look. He yelled through the rain, asking for directions to a specific address. I apologized, telling him that I was lost too. His frown turned into a smile that sent chills down my spine. He bid me a strange farewell and walked back to his truck. Feeling uneasy, I decided to leave the motel and continue my journey. But as I made my way back to my car, I heard the man exiting the building behind me. His footsteps echoed through the rain, and I could feel his gaze on my back. I hurried to my car and locked the doors just in time. The man came up to my window and tried to forcibly open the door, his rage-filled eyes staring into mine. I thanked to my lucky stars for the auto locks as I sped off, leaving him behind in the rain. I drove as fast as I could, desperate to escape the darkness of the forest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the city and found help. It turned out that the motel I had stopped at had closed down months ago, and the sign was still operational for some unknown reason. The memory of that eerie encounter stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. From that night on, I made sure to have an alternative navigation methods while driving in remote areas. The rain may have obscured my view, but it couldn't dampen my spirit for adventure. At 25, I decided to take on a solo hike, a personal challenge that I always wanted to accomplish. Living on my own for the first time in my life made me want to explore doing other things by myself too. The idea of going for a long hike sounded like the perfect accomplishment. I had never done any outdoor activities before, so this was going to be my first big trail. I did some research online and found a trail that was supposed to take around 8 hours to complete. I packed as much water and food as I could and set out on Monday morning. The trail started off narrow, barely wide enough to walk on without stepping on the borders. It was well defined, so I wasn't too worried about getting lost. The rain had left the trail muddy, but I didn't let that deter me. As I continued, I couldn't help but notice that the trail was getting wider. It struck me as odd since I knew that there was supposed to be a thin trail all the way through, but I brushed it off, thinking it might be temporary widening. After 6 hours of hiking, I still hadn't reached the end, and that's when I began to worry. According to my calculations, I was 2 hours behind schedule. I realized that I might have taken the wrong turn somewhere. Panic started to set in, as the sun was already setting, and I needed to turn back if I wanted to get out of the forest before dark. I retraced my steps, and after a while, I noticed footprints going perpendicular to the trail, cutting across the forest. It was strange because I hadn't seen them before. I tried to brush it off, thinking that I was just not observant on my way up. As I walked back, it started to get darker. The moonlight provided some light, but I had not packed a flashlight. The forest became eerily quiet, and all I could hear was the sound of my footsteps. That was until I heard something else. Something else was walking on the gravel. I stopped dead in my tracks and stared ahead into the darkness. The footsteps went on for a few steps before stopping. My heart raced as I wondered who else could be out there in the dark. I tried to call out a greeting, but no one answered. I decided to move forward, but after a few steps, the footsteps went away again. Fear gripped me as I walked back, trying to find my way out of the forest. The footprints I had seen before were gone, and I was left in complete darkness. The forest seemed to close in on me as I stumbled through the undergrowth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found the trail I had originally taken. I made my way back to the car, feeling relieved to have escaped the forest. 3 weeks later, I saw a chilling news report. 2 bodies were found in the same forest I had hiked in. The news didn't give exact locations, but it was the same area near the trail I had taken. I couldn't help but shudder, realizing that I had just been 10 feet away from something sinister. The experience shook me to the core, and I couldn't help but wonder what horrors might have been lurking in the shadows that day. It was a hike that I would never forget, and one that made me rethink my solo adventures in the future.